Hi, writer. Want my support to get your book finished and out into the world? Join my Inner Circle membership, a community of supportive writers where each month we set goals, share pages, learn new techniques, and get you unstuck fast so that you can make continuous progress on your writing goals. Coached Writers Finish. And you can get me as your virtual book coach in this group program for only $199 a month, much less than a single one-on-one coaching session. Check out the details at susievidori.com/inner circle. We have live events happening all the time, so grab your spot now to join us. Welcome to the Show Don't Tell Writing Podcast with me, Susie Vidori, where I peel back the layers of how to wow your readers with your fiction, your nonfiction. Anybody can bang out a first draft, but it takes a little more work to make your book as amazing as it can be. Join me as I share the step-by-step writing techniques you could apply to your writing right away, as I host successful writers who share a behind-the-scenes look at their own writing lives, and as I live coach writers on their pages, giving practical writing examples that will make your own writing stronger. Nobody is born knowing how to write an engaging book. There are real and important skills that you need to learn. On this show, I cut through the noise and get you all the info you need. I can't wait to see how this information is going to transform your writing. I know I always say it, I have a special guest, but this one I have a really special connection with. Michelle Hazen is somebody who I met almost a decade ago now, and she did a 3-chapter edit of my novel that ended up landing me an agent. And when I got her feedback, it was just like this light bulb went off inside my brain because she gave feedback in such a very different way that she talked. And I learned so much from just that 3-chapter edit. But like I said, I ended up landing an agent, but also I just feel like there are so many things that are unwritten that many editors have a poor time explaining. And so in a roundabout way, Michelle actually made me want to be an editor because I realized that there was a different way of doing things. And when I actually got my accreditation many years later as a book coach, when I was listening to the courses, there was a course in there or a lesson that was narrated by Michelle Hazen and her coaching. And I didn't realize that she actually had been involved with Author Accelerator long before I knew her, long before, and she wasn't doing it anymore at the time. But I realized I was in the right place. If this is where she learned how to edit and how to teach in the way that she did, I didn't end up working with Michelle again because she wasn't taking clients by the time that novel was finished. But I did recently run into her at a conference or a retreat in Denver, Colorado. And I told this story when I met, and she just about cried because you don't realize how your work is going to affect other people. And so when she was explaining to me that she had a new book coming out, Kiss and Tell, How to Write Unforgettable Sex Scenes, I knew that that was the kind of book that is going to be so, so helpful to you listeners, because if you love the style that I teach and the really practical way that I teach writing, I learned some of it, or at least was inspired in the beginning by the way that Michelle teaches. And this does not disappoint. So, okay, I'm going to have a content warning here. This podcast episode is rated explicit. We tried to keep it as clean as possible, but we are talking about sex scenes. So there are some things in here that if you're not interested in this, please skip ahead. But I must say that whether you are writing any type of romance, any type of relationship, kissing, anything physical, anything intimate, this book is a great read because it's extraordinarily practical, which is what I love about it. We go into all kinds of things. I did read the book before I interviewed Michelle, and so we spoil a lot of it. You can get an idea, but definitely go pick the book up if you're writing anything in this sphere because you're going to learn a ton. Other than this current book, Michelle is actually the critically acclaimed author of 9 contemporary romances, soon to be many more, and writes dark romance thrillers under the pen name Nika Grace. Her books have won the Book Pipeline Award, Fiction 101 Award, the Lone Star Award, Great Expectations Award, and Linda Howard Award of Excellence. Do you see a trend here? She started out volunteering to mentor aspiring authors in Pitch Wars. If anybody remembers that, it was a huge program. What an honor to be part of in any way, shape, or form. And she loved the creative collaboration process so much that she opened Sanctuary Editorial. As a writing coach and freelance editor since 2016, she specializes in helping authors fall madly in lust with their own manuscripts. If she's not reading or writing, she's probably hiking, rock climbing, staring longingly at a horse, or driving an indefensible number of miles to get to a revivalist concert. She's semi-nomadic with a home base in Moab, Utah, but her muse lives in New Orleans. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh my gosh, I blew through this book, couldn't wait to read it, and thank you for giving me an arc. It was absolutely amazing. I mean, there's so much to think about when writing sex scenes. Who knew?
Yeah, it's really one of the most technically complex types of scenes, which means you have a lot of options, right? Like you can calibrate it so precisely to your needs for the book. Like it's almost exciting to have that many.
Oh my gosh, you're preaching to the choir here. I get excited about writing. But first, let's just back up for a second because we have listeners from all different walks of life and from all different levels of writing. What do you actually mean by sex scenes? What are we talking about? Like, what is a sex scene?
I have a whole chapter in my book about how I'm like, hey, you guys, it's not just penetrative sex. That can be all kinds of things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So especially when you're delving into queer couples and whatnot, like you can't be so prescriptive with what's a sex scene. But we're talking about like past kissing, like heavy making. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like so
something that you would
moments.
normally be like, I had sex, not like we fooled around.
Yeah,
What okay. For you and your character's preferences.
Exactly. Okay, but how do they fit into books? Is it only...
Well, and also I should say, there's a lot of stuff in the book that will help you make your closed door sex scenes steamier. So even if you're closing the door before the actual thing, there's a lot of other things you can do to make that read steamier, which I think people don't think about. And then also there's a ton about how to write kissing because writing kissing can be really hard.
And I love that. And the writing kissing chapters came kind of at the end. And I was like, oh, that's like what a nice bonus, right?
To be handy because I wanted to pull from all the chapters that came before it and be like, okay, we're going to take this principle and now you can see how you apply that to kissing and this other principle and this other principle. But I would feel bad giving people a 30 chapter book on how to write a kiss. But girl, you could use 30 chapters on how to write a kiss. Like it's just two mouths smushing together. Like there's almost nothing good you can say about that. So you got to get up pretty early to make it.
You made that sound decidedly unsexy, and that's amazing because I've read your work. No, it's the opposite. So I love that you can like dress it down. But yeah, I mean, the book really deals with, and Michelle, thank you for addressing it because those intimate scenes like Kiss and Tell, the book, actually isn't just for erotica. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm never going to write a sex scene, but you want your characters to get together, if you have any level of steam or romance in your book, how do you make it hot? This is the right place to learn that. Okay, if people are listening along and say like, I don't know if I can write this, who can put this kind of scene in their book? Everybody?
Interesting. Well, like I said, you can use this for any heat level of romance. And I did want to say when I was researching the other things that were out there on this topic, what I found is almost all of it for erotica authors. And this book is really specific for romance authors because a lot of the things I'm delving into are the emotional resonance of those scenes, the metaphorical value of those scenes. It's not just the sex itself. It's really about what it's doing for the relationship around it. So it's not as useful for erotica authors because they're writing more of the pure encounters themselves. And this is showing you how to use it to serve your story.
Yeah, absolutely. And
the question that you asked about, like, who can use this, who would put this in their book, like, that brings me back to why I decided to write the book in the first place, which is I was getting so many editing clients asking for tips on how to write sex scenes and like, or not knowing where to start. And the question that comes up over and over is, what do other people find hot? And it's a really tough question to answer, especially because America has this weird thing where everything is kind of about sex and we use it to sell everything from like beer to pickup trucks. But at the same time, we're not talking about it in detail. You know, Europe is way more comfortable with nudity than we are. They're way more comfortable with actually talking about sex than we are. Like, we're this weird mix of exhibitionist and prude. You kind of have to ask yourself, who benefits from our silence? And the answer is mediocre men.
All right.
Once women started sharing about when they weren't satisfied in bed or when their marriages sucked, like they started leaving. They started demanding more for themselves. And that's part of what we're doing in romance novels. And I used as heteronormative example on purpose right there, because I don't think our staff have problems with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's, there's such a range, but you're right. This, sort of prude culture is specific.
And we need to talk more in depth about what sex looks like in the context of a loving relationship. My first book was a Don't Fake Your Own Orgasms manifesto, because I was like, nobody's going to be improving if you're grading on a curve, babe. But
I love that.
Another reason that I'm glad I wrote the book, and it's not why I wrote the book, I didn't figure this out till the end, but another reason that I'm glad I wrote the book is, so I was trying to write the conclusion, and I was like, nothing left to say. I wrote 30 chapters of different things you could do to your sex scenes. Like, I said what I said. And so I was on this hike with my husband and an engineer friend of ours, which is not the brain trust for how to write romance novels, by the way. But I was stumped. I was like, what am I going to write in the conclusion? You guys read a lot of nonfiction. Like, what are conclusions usually say? Like, I didn't want to say, in conclusion, I conclude.
We'll be right back.
Is your podcast driving real results, or does it feel like a lot of effort with very little return? If you're a podcaster using your show to grow your business, then Podcasting Amplified is the podcast for you. You may have launched expecting listeners to flock in, but instead you're stuck on a handful of downloads while juggling recording, editing, promotion, and wondering what's missing. Well, Podcasting Amplified delivers no fluff episodes packed with real-world tips and strategies on positioning, recording, growth, and turning your podcast into something that actually supports your goals. So search Podcasting Amplified on your favorite podcast app today and start building a podcast that gets results.
In conclusion, we covered these topics. No, right? Like, boring.
Like, why bother? It's so boring. So what we came up with, and my husband reminded me of this, and then once he reminded me of this, I was off to the races. But he was like, look, whether you mean it to be or not, romance is sex ed.
Yeah.
A lot of us grew up stealing our mom's romance novels to learn what was normal. And now, as adults, we're still normalizing what we should expect for ourselves through these books, because romance novels, if you think about it, they're the only creative medium where you see sex within the context of a loving and healthy relationship.
Yeah.
In every other medium, they're separate, right? You have a rom-com movie where they just get to the kissing, or you have porn where it's just sex, no relationship. Nothing teaches you, okay, when you're with your partner, when you're with somebody that's like really special to you, the one, what does sex look like then? What role does it play in the relationship? How does your communication happen in the bedroom as well as in the kitchen? We play a really important role because we're telling people what to expect of themselves. Or
what's possible.
Exactly.
What's possible.
Teaching the next generation like what their romantic relationships can be. And if you're going to set that bar, you better be setting it high.
I love that. And I love that, when we talk about it, it's well integrated. And so everything in the book actually talks about how to integrate it into your novel, into the storyline, into, the stakes, into the risks that the characters are taking, and into their emotional arc, and not just inserted as a sex scene.
Absolutely. Like they should all be load-bearing sex scenes. There shouldn't be a single sex scene you can take out of your romance novel where the story will still make sense. Because I love to write those big turning point moments of my romances in the sex scenes themselves, right? Like, what I've learned when I first started out as a baby author, I would send my stuff to beta readers and they would be like, oh, what about this? And I'd be like, I said that in the book, in words. Like, how do you not remember it? And then what I realized over time was you need to use images, right? Images stick in people's heads better than just telling them the information. And so we know people absorb metaphors better than just talking. So why wouldn't we use sex for a metaphor when that's the thing that people are going to be paying the most attention when you bring it up on the page and wave it around in front of them? Like, why wouldn't you use that really grabby thing to sell the most important metaphor of your book?
Oh, I love that. And you are on the Show Don't Tell podcast. So the fact that you're saying, imagery works better than telling them, of course it does, right? And I love how you talk about the fact that sex can be a metaphor, and also that those moments or those intimate moments, whatever ends up happening, can be a snapshot of everything else that's happening around us. And it's something that I often coach in every area of your book, really. Like, don't just have them sipping tea to have them busy, but, and I say sipping tea because every time I say they're not doing anything, they're standing around talking, and then they come back with writers often come back with sipping tea or pouring tea. And I'm like, that's not enough. It has to be a metaphor for something that compares or contrasts or mirrors what else is happening in their lives. And sex is the perfect place to do that, or, an intimate scene, whatever that ends up being.
I have all these writing exercises in the book, and part of it is intended to just get you brainstorming outside of your box of what you've done before. But one of them is try to write a sex scene that shows, like, if you are introducing your characters only through this sex scene, how would they have sex? Like, show us who this person is through how they would have sex.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Like, splash their point of view over absolutely everything. Everything in your book should be colored by the way that your character sees the world. And this is no different. And that's what's funny is because I do coach writers in romance and also in other genres who have these scenes in their books. And it's always this thing where they're like, Susie, like, I don't know. Like, and I'm like, just write it. Like, I'm pretty professional about it at this point. It's very, I hate to say mechanical because that's like the opposite of what we want, but like, it's very cut and dry to me in terms of what you need to do. But what's interesting to me is writers who are amazing at the prose and the rest of their book, they like stop and then they pull back. They pull way back in their. I see this all the time. Newer writers who are just trying this for the first time, they pull way back and they write their sex scene like they're looking from the ceiling and they're looking down and they're not in their characters' bodies and they're not doing. I mean, we can talk about all of this in a minute, but they actually treat the sex scene very differently, and it's because of that embarrassment or that awkwardness or that, like, I don't know what I'm doing. So what do you say to writers who are embarrassed or terrified of writing these scenes? Any tips?
I mean, I'm so excited that you said all those things because I was dealing with that exact issue all the way through the book because I see the same thing. They're writing along, they're brilliant. The sex scene comes and they're like, and they
can't see you in
painting to make me this Etch-a-Sketch thing. I'm like, what are you doing? I see it in my love.
Renoir painting doing Etch-a-Sketch. Yeah. Yeah, right. And it's it's like they pull back.
100% the self-consciousness. And even in the introduction to the book, I'm starting to deal with that, where it's like, listen, you need to be comfortable with this yourself before you can talk about it. And then the second thing is you're self-conscious because you're thinking of you, and nobody does good writing when they're thinking of themselves, right? When you're really in flow, you forget you have seats. You forget to eat, you forget to change the laundry over, you know what I mean? So if you're being really self-conscious and thinking, oh, people are going to judge me, or you're thinking about yourself having sex, you're not going to write a good sex scene. You got to get deeper into character. And I have a whole chapter about how to get into the mindset of writing sex to help get over that self-consciousness. But the first thing you need to do is write a scene that's not for anybody, that you're never going to show to anybody.
So I love that tip.
Free yourself up a little bit to do what you really want. And then you need to get deeper into your character. Like I say, if you're writing sex where your character comes up with something that you personally haven't tried or you wouldn't like, that's when you know you're doing it. Because then you're far enough into their head and not your head. You're not writing a sex scene for yourself. That's gross. Nobody wants your self-insert fan fiction in your romance novel. It's for your characters. Your characters should be their own people. And I'm not kidding you, Susie. Like, it is creepy to me a few times where my characters would come up with sex things and I had to Google. I'm like, is that a thing? I'd never heard of this. How did it look? Where did those ideas come from?
So that you're like, my characters come up with something that I'm supposed to write. I just love the way that your brain thinks. It's amazing. But yeah, you had some great tips in there. Everything from, get a glass of wine and like get into the mood, and everything right through to write the sex scene from beginning to end and don't stop, right? Like all of those tips. There's tons and tons of tips.
Longer writing sessions really help, making sure you can't be interrupted by your husband, your kids, or your mom. No, nothing breaks the mood faster than in-laws, my friend. Like when you're writing those scenes, go to the back room in the library. Don't go to the coffee shop where the guy can read over your shoulder. He'd read over my shoulder. Oh my God, I'm always editing sex scenes on airplanes. As soon as I get an airplane.
Airplanes, because I write on airplanes all the time. I mean, I'm on a lot of airplanes.
I'm never writing a clean scene on an airplane.
And sometimes, and I'm usually, I try not to edit like that scene, but people will often stop me, or the airline hostesses will stop me afterward and be like, "Are you the one who was writing the book?" Like it's and you don't even know that they're paying attention, but they are. They're looking.
They are. So yeah, you want to give yourself more privacy and more of a container for that. And like, it's hard enough to drop into flow for writing in general, but with sex, you really want to do it start to finish, because then you get the warm up arc and the cool down arc instinctively. If you're pulling in and out, you have to match up that arc of transition consciously, which is much harder than doing.
Okay, I'm not going to call out the euphemism that you just used.
Fair.
That was something that you said. If you're saying in and out, you're probably not doing the sex scene. I'm going to give away a little of your...
And there's two more things I want to talk about. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Oh my gosh. Please stop it, everyone, with the in and out. We do not need you to narrate every in and out. Anything that's being done repeatedly, which sex, we know you do the things more than one time. Don't describe them all on the page.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. So people pull way back in point of view, and I think that's a mistake. And we're going to talk, I think, a little bit more about that in terms of the emotional resonance of a scene, but as well. And I love, because it came up a few times in the book, but it's things that we talk about as editors and coaches all the time: the right hand, the left hand, the third hand that appears out of nowhere because it's not possible, right? Like, we get very mechanical. And I think sometimes in a first draft, you do have to write it that way, or you have to think about it that way, and you have to know that it makes sense. But then take all that crap out, and we can imagine, right? Like, it feels very mechanical.
Like, the left hand went here, and the right hand went there. And I think when I start teaching choreography, people think I'm going to be going really in detail with that, where I'm like, the knee goes here and the ankle goes here. And I'm not, because nobody is feeling sexy when they're thinking about their ankles.
And if you're doing it right, you're not thinking about it in the moment. I'm thinking about, wow, my ankle is placed in a great place.
Not
exactly.
You just need
your body knows what to do.
Enough of a clue to know what they're doing and where, and for it not to be confusing, but not to be pedantic with the right hand and the left. Every time that they start with the right hand and the left hand, all I can think is the hokey pokey. And like, put your left hand in, you take your left hand out. We can talk about with that getting in the mindset thing. I really recommend the 3-task process for writing sex scenes. And you're going to think that this is really dumb, and I'm saying write and then edit, and that I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't bother saying that. What I'm actually saying is 3-task process. If you're new to writing sex scene choreography, it helps to sit down before the sex scene, pick out your setting, pick out where they're going to be, pick out kind of your emotional tone, if it's going to be like an urgent, fast wall bang, or if it's going to be like a slow and romantic under the stars, slow build up kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, I'm blushing already, Michelle. I love it.
Your positions. And when my critique partner and I used to write a bunch of sex scenes, and I'd be like, how far in are you? She's like, I'm just planning for second orgasm. I got to get to the third position change. She was just lining them up. But you kind of want to think about, like, what is the best method in terms of position for their relationship right this second? And so kind of get a rough idea.
The power balance, there's things that you can do, right? Yeah.
That's absolutely a really good suggestion. Yeah, the power dynamic, like, who has more at stake here? Who's in control? Who's more uncertain? And then you map out a little bit before you start, so you don't have to stop and consciously think about things in the scene. And then when you go to write it, you give yourself a bigger time of uninterrupted writing time than you normally do. You get more privacy than you normally do. You really try to get yourself into the mode with them. And then you write the sex scene in one big flash blur. And the reason and then you go back afterward and edit all the fidgety stuff. The left hands, the right hands, the exact way you said things. That's to your word choice, sentence rhythm, the music of the sentences, the way they build and ebb and flow and climax and change.
I wish you could see Michelle's face as she says these things. She knows what she's saying, and she's doing it on purpose. She's using her words actually to mirror
the other. It's
really
funny though that what you're doing with sentence rhythm is you're building a tempo and you're building to a climax or a crescendo, because that's what you're doing in your scene as well. But like, you don't want to be thinking about all those things while you're writing. And a lot of writers, I think, are sitting over there going, well, if I was good, I'd be able to do all of that. No, my friend, that is not how your brain works. This is how your brain works. Your creative mind is the most activated and the most turned on when your prefrontal cortex is deactivated, right? So your prefrontal cortex does all the inhibiting functions, the inhibiting that goes, you just said trust 7 times. that says, oh my gosh, Michelle's chapter 12 through 17 is all this fidgety things I can be doing to my sentences, and I need to think about that right now. No, absolutely not. As soon as inhibition and self-critique come in, creativity flies out the window. Creativity is generative, it's playful, it's circular, it throws out 20 ideas instead of one right idea. And you need it to do that. If you really want it to flow and feel natural and be able to get into your characters, you can't be judging yourself in the moment. So you have to save all that judging and analyzing and polishing and fine-tuning for the third best. And sex scenes do need more revising than other things, because if you're in the mode, you tend to write too many sentences that are too long, all smashed together. Like I can write a thesis on sentence and rhythm, and all of my sentences are too long in the first pass of my sex scene, right? And I say all this stuff about word choice. I'm not messing with that when I'm writing my scene. I'm going straight through and I'm messing because I can't risk turning on my frontal cortex in the middle of a scene, or it's like trying to drive with your foot on the gas and the brakes at the same time.
And honestly, I mean, if you're in the throes of a real intimate moment and your frontal cortex is engaged, you're probably doing it wrong. It's like, you're probably doing it wrong. Stop.
You're trying to mimic the mindset of your characters in all these different levels, and you can't do that if you're faking it. Like, it's just easier to do it if you're really trying to put yourself in that frame of mind.
Yeah. And I love what you said earlier about your characters coming up with something and then you having to Google it and saying, well, let's go there. You know, you don't have to have done it to write it, right? And it's not your readers, avid readers of romance and avid readers of lots of genres that enjoy the romantic arcs know that. They're not going to think that this is something that you have done.
So I do, but like the truth of the matter is if you don't understand that I'm writing fiction, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I can't write just my own life, or I would only have one book. I have 9 novels out right now. I'll have 11 by the end of the year. I've got stacks more in the pipeline. I only have one sex life to pull from. I guarantee you, like, it is not as interesting as if I wrote fictional sex lives for all my different individual characters.
I love that. I love that. And if you've met Michelle before, if you've ever read her work, you'll know that I think you say that you can't stop writing. You write all the time. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you have that many books and many, 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 many more to come. Okay. So we talked a little bit about it being more than just a sex scene. So context is really important, right? The context for the sex scene is the most important. What does that actually mean in terms of where they belong in your story? Isn't like sex isn't just sex. How do we put it in the book?
Yeah, I think people try to go with beat sheet too much on this. And they're like, I'm supposed to do this by this. And then they get to the scene and it's not working. And I'm like, oh, is it not working because you're not listening to your characters? You're listening to your spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
like
the 43%
where a sex
mark.
scene goes depends on what you're using it for. If you're using it for an obstacle to their future relationship, if you're using it to culminate their future relationship, if you're using it for a nice togetherness moment before you break them up so that it really hurts when you break them up.
The high before the low.
second-
Give them somewhere to fall, right?
Exactly. And everybody does that. There's a reason that there's almost always a fight right after the sex scene. Sometimes you have to change things up just so you don't get cliche with that. But yeah, it usually goes high before. In my second book, I put a sex scene in the 3rd chapter, which was a terrible, hard thing that I did to myself, because once you used up the first sex, you have so many less firsts to go for, right? And so what I did to keep the tension up after I did that so early was they had a kiss on the mouth. So I did the pretty woman. They hadn't kissed on the mouth. And then the emotional intimacy, the commitment wasn't there, right? They weren't allowing themselves to go there. And so they had the physical, but they weren't allowing themselves to have that emotional closeness. And so you always want to have something held back. So yeah, with where you place the sex scene, it's all about what it's saying about the relationship, the purpose of each individual sex scene. I usually end up with 3 or 4 in my books. So each one serves a different purpose and it has a distinctively different flavor to it. In the choreography chapter, I talk about, like, if you were in a John Wick movie, you don't get 2 hammer versus machete fight scenes. And in your sex scene book, you don't get 2 wall sex scenes. You know, you got to do it differently every time so that they all feel different, but it's also because they should be serving different points of the plot. And then also just the buildup. You need enough time to withhold that from the audience and make the audience long for it in a billion different ways before you give it to them, or they don't. Like, I think sometimes people think that what's hotter is just more quantity of sex scene. But what's actually hotter is making the reader want it and making the character want it before they get to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact, when you talk about having 3 or 4 of the scenes in your book, it's kind of the same concept as mirroring the beginning and the end of your book, where you can put them in a similar situation, and yet the character has grown and changed, and their relationships have changed, and everything that they react, like the scene might be the same-ish, but and you're saying mix it up, of course, but you're putting them in a similar situation, and the way that they interact is completely different depending on where they are. And so it's a really neat thing to show that growth and make sure that it doesn't always feel the same. They're not just stopping, doing the deed, and then moving on, right? Like, it's really good. I think you say in the book that sex is always a metaphor for their journey, right? And so the different pieces in their journey you can actually demonstrate or show us during that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really good way to say it. I like that, where it's a snapshot of their relationship at different moments. Like, what was missing in the first sex scene? What has changed between them by the second or the third? Like, are they allowing more physical intimacy to mirror the emotional intimacy? And one of the fun things to do, I think, is always have a character do something for the first time. Like in the 90s, we saw a lot of virgin tropes, and we see almost no virgin tropes nowadays, but there's always that thing that you haven't tried yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yes, it shows the difference in their relationship, yes, but it also can show the difference in your character, right? Like, their personal growth and how they react in that moment. So yes, the relationship and also that character. You talk a little bit about in the book about point of view, right? And especially, it's very popular right now to have dual point of view in a romance. And so you have a choice. How does point of view and whose point of view you write that scene from come into play? How do you choose that? Which one's better? Is it always your main
like
character?
most romance authors are female, and they sometimes are worried about writing from the male point of view. But then when you get into same-sex romance, you're not thinking about male versus female point of view. And you still have to decide whose viewpoint are you going to tell the sex scene from, right? So it's always the character who has the most at stake, just like it would be for any other kind of scene, where it's whoever has the most emotional vulnerability or the most on the line. Like, you're writing a romance where one person thinks they're more into the person than the other one is, then it's that point of view that you want to use for the sex scene. Is the person that's the more worried about it, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
sometimes it can be fun to switch and have the more confident point of view, so that they can be like reassuring and steadying to the more vulnerable person. You don't have a lot of insecurity self-talk. But in general, it's the person who has the most at stake, or the one that, like, if you're using it for a turning point in your book, the person who's going to change or make a decision. Like, this is the scene where they decide to commit. This is the scene where they decide to run away. This is the first time they've been with somebody where they told them their real name, that kind of thing.
That's a good story where they told them their real name. Now I want to know more. All right. We talked a little bit about making the reader want it and anticipation and that sense of longing, I think, is what you talk about in the book. But when do you put the sex? Like, okay, so we're talking about all the buildup. We're saying maybe 3 or 4 scenes and paying attention. When do you actually release that tension, pun intended, and put the sex? When does that belong in a book?
So first of all, you don't release the tension. I have another chapter just on that, where you don't drop all the tension when you get to the sex scene. You still want there to be things held back in every moment until the final scenes of the book. Otherwise, if you feel that tension sag like a string that you just dropped, and you're like, okay, I'm good now. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And then they put the book down and they go get a drink of water and they think that their characters are happy and they don't feel the urgency to flip the page, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Beat sheet wise, it's almost always the third quarter, y'all. Third quarter has the most back. Because by the last quarter, they're fighting, and the first quarter, they're still building up. But you really want to listen to your characters. Like, if they want to have sex really early, sometimes instead of trying to hold them back, you should let them and then blow everything. You can't ever drop the tension and the obstacles. So if they do have sex, then you need to have more reasons why they do anything. Like, for instance, I saw a second chance romance recently where they were a divorced couple. So, like, why can't they have sex? They've already had sex a bunch of times. They made a no sex rule on their road trip, so that wouldn't get in the way of them trying to work through their actual issues, which was great.
Of course they did. Yeah, of course they did, right? Like, let's put limits. It's no different. I mean, I'm a fantasy writer. It's no different in fantasy. If we don't have any limitations on our magic, then it could do everything in the world. That's no fun. I could solve everything with one wave of my wand, right? You got to have limitations. I love that. Okay.
Yeah. And then I've also talked about how there's an expectation in gay romance and hetero romance where they're kind of expecting penetrative sex. And so if you fold that off, like if you have the earlier scenes be, oral or, a hand job or some other kind of, they're fooling around, but they're not getting all the way there, that can be a good way to pay off a little bit of tension early and then keep back something more for later.
Yeah, exactly. Save those firsts, right? We don't want to be seeing the same thing over and over again. Okay, we talked a little bit about the fact that romance books are a form of sex ed, and I love that view. And they are getting more prevalent, more accepted, more. And also in TV and movies, we're also seeing more and more on screen that isn't pornography, right? Like that actually fits in the narrative, and the rules are changing. Like it used to be that we didn't see a lot of bums on screens, and we do now, right? Like that's a pretty regular thing. But what can we do better in books than we can do on the television screen?
Ooh, that's a great question. You have a whole different toolbox as a novelist. But before I jump into that, I want to go back to something else you said, because it's really funny that I wrote this book and I wrote the conclusion about romance novels being the only medium where you can really see the emotional resonance of sex within a romantic relationship. And since I wrote that, heated rivalry came to the screen.
I know, how can we not talk about it? I'm like, when is it going to come up? I almost brought it up when you were talking about the game. Yeah, I'm a Canadian hockey mom. So, yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Heated Rivalry is a gay hockey player romance. It was a book, and it just become an incredibly
several books. Yeah, several books.
So on HBO and Crave. But the reason that I think one of the reasons that it's gotten so popular, and one of the reasons that I think it's different from any adaptation that's come before, is it shows sex within the context of the relationship. It shows a lot on the screen for mainstream TV. Like it's basically everything but the private bits. And there's a lot of it, but it's all really tied into where they are in their romance. And actually, it's a really good example of how you can put steps early, but keep the conflict up. Because they start out friends with benefit, right? They're hooking up and the feelings come in later. And so you really see that progression of increasing intimacy, trust, and vulnerability with those boys, where at first they're just banging. And then like there's a level of intimacy where they're the only ones that they're out to. And then they're trying new firsts that they've never tried before. And then they're calling each other by their first name and not their last name. Every sex scene is a step up. It's a distinct step different than the one before it. And all of them they're a perfect metaphor for the relationship. I very rarely see what I would actually call erotic romance, where it is a romance, but the story of the relationship is told through the medium of sex. And I think Heated Rivalry actually counts, because every single sex scene is different. Every single one tends a different turning point, a different step up in their relationship, but that we've never seen that kind of nuance come to the screen. And I think that's a lot of what the viewers are responding to, and why that IT has become so popular, is because in books, we get more emotional resonance to the sex. Like in a rom-com, even if it goes as far as to say that the characters have sex, you get like 2 minutes of pumping when they're kind of awkwardly wrapped in a sheet. Like it doesn't tell.
I love that.
It tells you zero information other than we did it and we had a pretty good time. That's a very shallow message. In romance novels, what we have in our toolbox as novelists that they don't have on TV is we have internal thoughts, we have internal sensations, we have word choice. So in movies, they have the grammar of lighting and shots and props
and
to set the emotional tone in a subconscious way. In books, what we're doing with the music of your sentence rhythms and your word choices is even beyond what they're doing. You're giving an emotional tone or a texture to your reader. Like it feels more romantic and wistful. It feels really hot and fast and rough. You know what I mean? It feels enemies to lovers versus it feels friends to lovers. You're setting all of this extra context up. And especially with getting the thoughts and feelings, like I think that's another way that early writers, when they're getting very subconscious, they get really focused on who's doing what. And you end up writing your whole sex scene like C-spot run. He did this. He did that. He did this.
Right hand, left hand. Hokey pokey. Yeah.
very mechanical. And that's absolutely not what we want in a romance novel. We come for the context. We come for the emotional piece of the sex. If we just wanted sex, we could watch porn. The internet has so much free porn, you guys. You don't have to pay for a novel if you want that. Women want something different when they come to romance. And there's been quite a few studies that show that men are more attracted to visuals, like visual stimuli, and women are more attracted to context. So if my husband likes to say, they don't just want the abs, they want the story behind the abs.
I love that. I love that. They want the story behind the abs. And I think, one of the things that really resonated for me, I mean, I coach this and I talk about it all the time with writers, but there were some things that were new and things that I hadn't thought about. And when you're bringing up heated rivalry, it kind of comes up as well, because yes, there are lots of firsts and there is lots of tension. And, one person maybe wants it more than the other at some point. And, there's this imbalance that they have to navigate. But at the same time, the one that really dropped for me when I read the book was the commitment piece. Like, we're having first, right? And to think about, the love declaration or the actual commitment. And I think that's the one where you can still hold that back. You can have all the actions and still be holding that one thing back. Are we exclusive? Are we really in this? Is this really something that we're going to pursue regardless, right? So there's some neat things that you can do in terms of holding that back. And I'd never heard it talked about quite in that way, like as a tool that you can hold back commitment, which is really cool. I mean, we do it naturally. I just hadn't ever really thought about it that way. So
we're all doing it in every romance.
Yeah.
Another reason that I think Rachel Reed's books really appeal to people is they're written a little bit more like fan fiction in the best way, where it's really a lot of the good stuff that you want,
Yeah.
Just really getting to see those boys be sweet for each other and really care about each other. But because they're always still in the closet, she can get away with so much sweetness because she always has that conflict of they're not willing to come out of the closet and be this for real, so they have to be a secret. So like she does a whole second book for Ilya and Shane, and we get to see them be so domestic and cute and adorable, but the conflict is always still there because they can't come out of the closet.
Or they feel they can. Yes, they feel they can't. I'm giving away a lot, but it's going to make people read the book. Talk about this for a moment. You're here to seduce your reader, not your character. What does that mean? Because it's a really neat way of thinking about it. You're seducing your reader, not the characters.
This is a tricky one because I'm telling you to be less self-conscious, but then I think that let's take it out of the sex world, and I think that makes it easier to understand. When I'm teaching somebody how to write a romance, I'm not saying, okay, show us that Abby fell in love with Chad. What we want is the reader to fall in love with Chad. So it's not enough to tell us that your character is getting turned on and then just have them hop into bed. Like, that's why I have trouble with these sex scenes where there's no foreplay and they're just like, I want you and me. I always say, why are they like, don't tell me that. Show me. This is a show don't tell podcast.
It sure is. Thank you.
If you don't heat up your character so that they want what they are doing, then your reader is not also heated up. What you're doing is you're showing, don't tell it. You're bringing the reader along on that same emotional and arousal journey that your character is on. So if you want to write a really effective romance, you make them fall in love so hard with your love interest. You know what I mean? And even if you're writing to straight women and you're writing a sapphic romance, you can still do this. Like, you're just making them, there's so many different levels of fiction that aren't just sexual. You're making them aesthetically appealing. You're making them demonstrations of value where they're competent or they're impressive in some way. They're just speaking Italian, like everybody. You're doing all these things. Like, when you describe them, you're not just saying they are hot. You are describing them in a way that makes them sound hot to the reader. So you're thinking about creating an experience, not just for your character, but for your reader, where they can go along with all of those same emotions. And I mean that in terms of the sex and arousal, but I also really, really mean it in terms of the emotional journey.
Yeah,
like, it's
absolutely.
just really not very satisfying to say, like, my character was horny and then they hopped into bed. Like, that's not hot to read.
Yeah, it doesn't allow your reader to find their place in it as well, right? Like, in most novels, and here we're talking about it in a slightly different context, your reader becomes your point of view character, right? And we want what they want, and we want the things, and we're in it with them. And so when you're saying, like, heat them up, and make them maybe fall in love with that character. And so that's like maybe one step removed from actually being the character. But yeah, that's where internal sensations and inner thoughts come in, because you want to be that person, right? Which you can't do on TV unless you have like annoying voiceovers, which is really limiting, right?
Right.
You
And that
can't
helps
do
a couple of things. So you get more emotional resonance. You get a toolbox that sets you apart from TV. So you give your reader a reason to get off Netflix and buy your book instead. And then also you get out of that see, spot, run method of writing where you're just talking about the mechanics. Like if you're finding that all your sentences start with I or she or he, if they're all short and factual, you're probably just doing too much action, and you need to change it up with more emotion, more internal sensation, some metaphor.
Absolutely. Okay. Talk about being gross versus being detailed, because I think this is really important, right? Like, and maybe we don't want to go into the gross details, but like, what does that mean? Because I think it's really important, because sex scenes can feel really gross if they're done poorly.
A lot of it is about leaving out parts that aren't as romantic. Like nobody needs you to narrate the squelching sounds.
Not everything.
When you're talking about,
yeah.
I was talking on the retreat about this to somebody. They're like, I hate the part where they have to stop and put on the condom. Like I talk in the book about nods to birth control at various types, birth control, and also protecting against STDs. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. It's not just condoms. But whatever you do, you need to not break your own tone. You need to keep it within the same urgent romantic tone, and you need to do it really, really fast so that you don't slow your pacing with them stopping and getting down the hall to the bathroom in their socks and digging around in a drawer. You know what I mean? That breaks the mood in real life. What you want is fast enough and phrased quickly enough that it doesn't pull you out of the mood. But most of what's gross and not gross is almost all down to word choice. Word choice, verb choice. And my personal, I hate this one. Everybody does it. Caused me to. It's such a stringent way to say it. Like, he caused me to. Like, you could see how in a sex scene.
It's a filter. It's a filter.
But it's so pulled back and mechanical.
It's one of those phrases that
romantic.
Can usually be eliminated, right? Yeah, absolutely. Don't be gross. Okay, so we're talking about, introducing birth control or introducing other sort of things that are part of modern life, and we want to model, right? Unless you purposely want to skip the birth control because there's going to be an unplanned pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about consent, because this is one that I have to have this conversation a lot with writers, because the expectations of consent today in today's publishing are very different from what they were 20 years ago in terms of making sure. And it's something I even bumped up with my first lower YA fantasy novel, where there was an unwanted kiss, and my publisher's like, you can't do that, right? Or you could, but then if you want every interviewer to ask you about it and to talk about consent, and that's what you want it to be about, and I was like, well, no, it's just something that maybe happened in, when I was growing up. But talk about consent for a minute, because I think it's really important for authors and writers to understand what's expected of them so that they can adjust for that and not make that mistake, because it can really be a problem in a book.
A lot of people are going into this at the angle of like, oh, I have to do the homework. Mom said I had to add a consent check-in, and now I have to fill it. And they're missing the whole point that consent is tension. We're giving you a whole nother tool, you guys, to build tension, and you're just throwing it out the window because you think of it as homework. Like, consent can be so sexy. Also, women tend to find it really sexy when men check in and make sure that they're really for sure having fun. You know what I mean? You don't want to be too repetitive. You can add more than one consent check-in. It doesn't have to be verbal. It can be as much as pulling back and checking their eyes. It can be just saying their name. It can be phrasing, tugging on the bands of their panties as can I, mother may I kind of step. With consent, you can have all these different descending into filthiness levels of, can we do this? What about this? What about this? You can make your writing so much sexier. It really doesn't have to be don't break your own tone. If you don't want it to be unromantic and weird and box checking, then don't write it like that. You're literally the one writing the scene. Write it in a sexy way. So You said earlier, I'm giving a lot away, but hopefully it'll make people want to read the book. we can talk about all this stuff at high level, but honestly, I had to write a book because it's so detailed to get into every single one of these different things. And I put myself through hell getting permission to publish examples so that I could have examples of all this stuff. Like, how do you describe a sex position without going into left and right, but still make it clear? I have all these examples of people doing it really well, and some amazing authors to provide examples for the book, including Katie Robert, who's written so much incredibly great erotica, and Tiffany Rice, who did that really hot Catholic priest dominant series. All these great authors.
The examples make the book. The examples make the book, and they make them real. And I mean, we're talking about show don't tell. That's the ultimate, right? Like, we can tell you how to write a sex scene, but we can also show you how it's done correctly, or well, or hotly, or whatever we want to say, whatever that makes that good scene. You have so many examples, and I think that makes it. I know it was a pain in the butt. We talked about that. How long
it was interesting for me though, because I wrote the whole book because I knew what I wanted to say, and then I had to go find examples from published books of the things I was talking about. And then I would write the little analyses after each one, being like, did you notice they were doing this? Did you notice they were doing this? And that word choice thing, boy, if you don't think best-selling authors are working their tails off on word choice, you have not been highlighting. Because it's like every other word, there's a very specific verb choice or a very specific adjective choice that changes the tone or provides contrast. It's really fascinating. Like, some of them, I had to cut back my analyses because they were doing so many things in like a one paragraph example that I was like, I literally don't have time to talk about all these.
Oh my gosh, I could unpack what you just said for an entire next episode, but here's what I want to comment on. A lot of times we think when we're coming to write a book in general, not even talking about sex scenes yet, that you either have talent or you don't, right? And that, like, if we try something the first time and people don't react to it the way that we want, we say, oh, we suck at writing and we never try again, right? But there are good and real tools, and sex scenes are no different, right? There are good and actual tools that you can learn that we teach on the podcast and in this book and in other places. And that's why there's book coaches and editors who coach and edits, right? And help you learn these things. And if you think that best-selling authors are sitting down with their glass of wine and just pounding it out that first, again, sorry for the pun, for that first draft, and then they're not actually going back and finessing it, the amount of finesse that's required for you to have the experience that you want, it's important to understand, how is your reader going to react? And what are the things? And there are people that have gone here before, and there are things to learn. And so, I could thank you for coming on the show today, Michelle. I think you said at one point in the book, I'm the Home Depot of tools for sex scenes or something to that effect.
And the Home Depot tools for sex scene writing. Yeah, right. It goes back to what I said at the beginning, where people are asking me, like, how do I write a good sex scene? What other people think is hot? What makes something hot? And I'm like, girl, I know. These are the ways that you can do it. Bringing all of those tools that you think best-selling authors are doing unconsciously or from talent and making it concrete and saying, this is how you do it. This is what you look for. If something's not working and it just feels icky, now you can figure out why. And there's a chapter in the book called Wine Tasting for Sex Scenes that will help you with all of that.
I actually saw that in the table of contents, and I was wondering if you were going to have wine pairings with taste. That's how my brain goes. I'm like, is this like, you should have a Chardonnay when you read this kind of sex scene? I'm like, it wasn't that. You'll have to read the book.
Well, so you're a great person to talk about this with because you're a professional wine taster. And when you get
I actually have my sommelier's license.
Wine taster, what you're doing is you're training your brain to differentiate between finer and finer variations. And if you don't have words for each of those things, you can't differentiate and you can't remember the different layers of flavor. And so what I'm teaching people to do is the same thing for sex scenes, where you learn the words for all these different techniques so that when you taste a glass of wine or you read a sex scene, you're seeing it on 30 different levels instead of 2 levels, red or white, good or bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those listening, I do have my sommelier's license. I have a university degree in wine. I've never worked in in that space, but it's something I've never shared on the podcast before, which is fine. But Michelle knows that about me. It's not a secret. It just never came up. But I want to say, just in closing, and I said this in the beginning as well, and we're going to mirror the beginning and the ending, that Michelle I met almost a decade ago now, and is, in a roundabout way, the reason that I became an editor, a book coach, because she showed me how to do it in a way that really resonated and I learned so much from. So if you're trying to learn this craft and you are interested in putting more romance, more kissing, maybe even a little bit of spice in your books, this is the right book for you to go and learn that. There are real skills to learn. Go have fun. Take your idea and make it as amazing for the reader as it is in your brain. Thanks for coming on the show today, Michelle.
That was perfect. I'm really glad that you had me on to talk about all that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Show Don't Tell Writing Podcast with me, Susie Vidori. It is my absolute honor to bring you the straight goods for that book you're writing or the book that you're planning to write. Please help me keep the podcast going by helping people find us. You can subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening to show how much you enjoy the show. That's how other listeners will find us. Also, visit susievidori.com/newsletter to hop on my weekly inspired writing newsletter list, where you'll stay inspired and be the first to know about all the upcoming training events and writing courses that happen in my community. Want my eyes on your writing? Submit a page of your current draft for a chance to come on the podcast at the link in the show notes. I'd love to chat with you about your writing in my always positive, incredibly supportive way, so that you can make great strides towards your writing goals. I'm here to cheer you on. Remember, that book you're writing is going to open doors that you haven't even thought of yet, and I can't wait to help you make that it the absolute best it can be. See you again right here next week.